I thought I knew my best friend better than anyone, but the secret I stumbled upon that night shattered everything. Part 1, The Discovery. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. I was just getting home from a late shift at work, exhausted and ready to crash. My apartment complex was usually quiet, but as I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a familiar car parked in a spot that wasn't its usual place. It was Nick's car, my best friend since high school. He lived a few blocks away, so seeing his car here, especially at this hour, struck me as odd. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he had stopped by to visit someone, or he and his wife, Megan, were out late and decided to visit a mutual friend in the building. But the more I thought about it, the more something gnawed at me. Nick hadn't mentioned coming by, and we usually told each other everything. So, out of pure curiosity, I decided to investigate. As I walked through the complex, heading toward the row of apartments near the back, I heard voices, soft, muffled, but distinct. And then, I saw them. Nick, standing outside one of the apartments, his arm around a woman who wasn't Megan. They were close, too close. The kind of closeness that told me this wasn't some innocent friendship or chance meeting. I froze in place, watching them from a distance as they talked, laughed, and then, in one swift moment, Nick leaned in and kissed her. My stomach dropped. This was Nick, the guy I'd always thought of as the loyal, stand-up husband. I had been at his wedding. I had known him and Megan for years, watched them build a life together. And now, I was seeing him betray her right in front of my eyes. I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. I felt a strange mix of shock, confusion, and anger swirling inside me, and the last thing I wanted was to cause a scene. Instead, I turned around, got back in my car, and drove home, my mind racing the entire way. How long had this been going on? Was this a one-time thing, or had he been cheating on Megan for months, maybe years? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do with this information? For the next few days, I tried to avoid Nick. I needed time to process what I had seen. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from him, I ignored it. Every time he asked to hang out, I made up an excuse. I didn't know how to face him, not after what I had witnessed. But avoiding him only made the guilt worse. I felt like I was complicit in his lie by keeping quiet. Megan didn't deserve this. She was one of the kindest, most genuine people I had ever met, and now she was being lied to, betrayed by the man she trusted most. Finally, after about a week of internal torment, Nick showed up at my apartment unannounced. He knew something was up. "Hey, man," he said as I opened the door. "You've been dodging me. What's going on?" I hesitated, my mind racing. Should I confront him? Call him out on his lies? Or should I just keep pretending like everything was fine? The silence stretched between us for a few uncomfortable seconds before I finally spoke. "Nick, we need to talk." He frowned, clearly confused. "About what?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "About the other night. I saw you. With her." His face went pale instantly. He didn't ask who her was. He knew exactly what I was talking about. For a moment, he looked like he was about to deny it, make up some excuse. But then, he sighed and sat down on the edge of my couch, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, it's not what you think," he started, his voice low. I felt a flash of anger rise up in me. "Not what I think. Nick, you kissed her. You kissed someone who isn't your wife. How long has this been going on?" He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his head in his hands. "A few months," he admitted quietly. "But it's complicated." I scoffed. "It's always complicated. What about Megan? Does she know? Do you even care what this would do to her?" Nick flinched at the mention of Megan's name, but he didn't respond right away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for this to happen." Part 2, The Struggle. After that night, Nick's secret became a weight I couldn't shake. Every time I saw him, it was like there was an invisible wall between us, built out of lies and deceit. He was still my best friend, but everything had changed. And the worst part? He wasn't ending the affair. He wasn't even trying to. He kept telling me he was confused, that he needed time to figure things out, but I knew what that really meant. He didn't want to give up either woman. Weeks passed, and I was stuck in the middle, torn between my loyalty to Nick and my growing anger at his betrayal. I couldn't look Megan in the eye without feeling guilty, knowing I was keeping something so huge from her. She was still her usual, bubbly self, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind her back. Every time she asked me how Nick was doing or if we had any plans, I felt like I was lying by omission. I wanted to tell her. God, did I want to tell her? But how could I? How could I be the one to destroy her world? She had no idea what Nick was doing, and I didn't want to be the one to break her heart. But the longer I stayed quiet, the worse it got. Nick wasn't making any moves to stop the affair, and it was eating me alive. I couldn't keep living with this secret. Something had to give. Then, one night, it all came crashing down. Nick and I had planned to grab drinks after work, something we did pretty regularly. But as I was getting ready to leave my place, I got a call from Megan. Her voice was shaky, on the verge of tears. "Can you come over?" she asked, her words trembling. My heart sank. She knew. Somehow, someway, she had found out. When I arrived at their house, Megan was sitting on the couch, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me Nick's phone. My stomach twisted as I looked down at the screen, seeing a series of texts between Nick and the woman I had seen him with. Explicit texts. Plans to meet up. All the evidence laid out in front of me, undeniable. "I saw these last night," Megan whispered, her voice barely audible. "He didn't even try to hide it." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt dry, and guilt gnawed at me. I should have told her sooner. I should have warned her, given her a chance to confront Nick before it got this far. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and betrayal. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain it? How could I justify staying silent when I had known for weeks? "I didn't want to hurt you," I finally managed to say, my voice hollow. I thought maybe he'd stop. That he'd realize what he was doing. Megan shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I trusted him. I trusted you." And just like that, everything shattered. Part 3, The Fallout. The aftermath was ugly. Megan kicked Nick out of the house that night, and within a week, she had filed for divorce. Nick tried to apologize, tried to explain, but it was too late. The damage was done. He had ruined his marriage, and there was no fixing it. As for me, my friendship with Nick was never the same. We still talk occasionally, but there's a distance between us now, a lingering tension that neither of us can fully ignore. I couldn't look at him the same way after what he did, and I think he knows it. Megan? She's doing better now. It took time, but she's moved on, built a new life for herself. We still talk sometimes, but our friendship never fully recovered. There's a part of her that still resents me for not telling her sooner, and I can't blame her for that. In the end, I learned a hard lesson: secrets like this don't just hurt the people involved, they hurt everyone around them. I thought I was protecting Megan by keeping quiet, but all I did was delay the inevitable. Part 4, Moving Forward. In the months that followed the divorce, everything felt surreal. Nick moved out of state to get a fresh start, or so he said. Megan, on the other hand, stayed behind, working through the emotional wreckage he left in his wake. We kept in touch, but there was always that unspoken tension between us. I think we both knew that our relationship would never return to what it once was. The betrayal had been too deep, the silence too damaging. I began to question everything: my loyalty to Nick, my choices, even my sense of right and wrong. Had I truly done what was best by keeping his secret? Or had I been cowardly, afraid to confront him and possibly lose a friendship? My internal turmoil didn't disappear just because Nick and Megan's marriage ended. If anything, it only intensified. A year later, I ran into Megan at a local coffee shop. She looked good, healthier, happier even. It was as though the weight of her past had finally lifted, and she was stepping into a new chapter of her life. We chatted for a while, catching up on the usual: work, mutual friends, life in general. But underneath the casual conversation, there was still that lingering sense of what if? What if I had told her sooner? What if I had warned her when I first found out? Before we parted ways, Megan turned to me, her eyes steady and calm. "I don't blame you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know you were in a tough spot. And I've had time to think about it. We all make mistakes." Her words offered some closure, but not total absolution. While I was grateful for her forgiveness, the weight of my inaction still hung over me. It wasn't something I could easily shake off. Nick? Well, I hear about him occasionally through the grapevine. He's moved on, dating someone new, though I can't say I'm surprised. As for me, I've learned to be more honest with the people in my life, no matter how uncomfortable the truth may be. Because if there's one thing this whole ordeal has taught me, it's that lies, whether spoken or unspoken, will eventually come to light. And when they do, the fallout can be more devastating than anyone could ever imagine. I didn't want to believe it at first, but the more I saw, the more it became impossible to ignore. My own brother was leading a double life, and it was tearing our family apart. Part 1, The Beginning of Suspicion. It all started with a gut feeling, one of those nagging instincts that you try to brush off but can't quite shake. My brother, Jason, had always been a straight shooter, a family man, devoted to his wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids. He was the last person I'd ever suspect of cheating, but over the last few months, something felt off. Jason and I were close. We grew up in a small town, only 2 years apart, and we shared just about everything. When he met Sarah in college, I knew right away she was the one for him. They were inseparable from the start, and I was there when he proposed, when they got married, and when their kids were born. They had what seemed like the perfect life. But recently, Jason had been acting strange. He was always on his phone, texting late at night, and whenever I asked him about it, he got defensive. He'd brush it off, saying it was work or something unimportant, but the tension was noticeable. Sarah hadn't mentioned anything, but I could tell she sensed it too. They didn't fight openly, but the atmosphere at their house had changed. Conversations were shorter, smiles forced. Something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. One particular evening stands out in my memory. It was a Friday, and as usual, I dropped by Jason's place after work to hang out. We'd grown up doing that, spending time together whenever we could, even as adults. But that evening, the air felt thick with unspoken tension. Sarah was quieter than usual, her eyes darting nervously toward Jason whenever she thought I wasn't looking. Jason, on the other hand, seemed oddly preoccupied, glancing at his phone more than normal. Something was definitely off. I decided to talk to him. I invited Jason out for a beer, hoping that away from the house, he'd open up. We went to our usual spot, a quiet bar we'd been going to since we turned 21. For the first hour, we kept the conversation light, talking about sports, work, the kids. But as the second beer settled in, I decided to confront him. Jason, man, is everything all right? You've seemed different lately. He didn't look at me right away, just stared at his drink for a few seconds before taking a slow sip. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, almost robotic. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a lot going on at work. I knew that was a lie. Jason loved his job, and even when it got stressful, he never let it affect him like this. So I pressed him. It's not just work, is it? Come on, you can talk to me. I'm your brother. He sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the conversation was already too much. It's nothing, really, he muttered. Just life, I guess. Things aren't as simple as they used to be. That vague answer told me everything I needed to know. He was hiding something, and it wasn't going to be easy to get it out of him. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention. I noticed he was spending more time away from home, always with excuses about work trips or late meetings. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to be growing more distant. It was like she knew something wasn't right, but didn't want to confront it. Then one day, everything came crashing down. Part 2, The Unwanted Proof. It was a Saturday afternoon when I stumbled across the proof I never wanted to find. Jason had asked me to borrow a tool from his garage, and while I was there, I noticed his phone buzzing on the workbench. He wasn't around, so I glanced at the screen, not intending to snoop, but the name that flashed up made my heart skip a beat. Anna. I didn't know any Anna in Jason's life. The message was simple: miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. There was no innocent explanation for that text. My brother, the man I had looked up to my entire life, was cheating on his wife. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Could I have been wrong? Could there be some innocent explanation? But no, I knew better. The text, the late nights, the distance between him and Sarah, it all made sense now. He wasn't just hiding something, he was living a lie. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him? Tell Sarah? I felt like I was stuck in a nightmare, unable to move or think clearly. I left the garage in a daze, the weight of the secret already pressing down on me. For the next few days, I wrestled with the decision of whether to tell Sarah. Part of me wanted to protect her, to make sure she knew the truth about what was happening behind her back. But another part of me felt conflicted. Jason was my brother, my blood. Was it my place to interfere in his marriage? Every time I saw them together, the tension was palpable. Sarah would try to engage Jason in conversation, but he'd only respond in monosyllables, barely looking up from his phone. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the hurt she was trying so hard to hide. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, knowing the disaster was inevitable but powerless to stop it. Then came the final straw, the moment when I knew I couldn't keep silent anymore. Part 3, The Breaking Point. It was a Sunday, and Jason had invited me over to watch the game. Sarah was out with the kids, visiting her parents, so it was just the two of us. I was trying to enjoy the game, but my mind kept drifting back to the text message I'd seen, to the lies Jason was living. Halfway through the game, Jason got up to get another beer. As he walked past, his phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't just glance, I picked it up. The message was from Anna again, and this time, there was no ambiguity. The words were clear: I love you. Can't wait to be together. My stomach dropped. When Jason came back, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I confronted him right then and there. "Jason, who the hell is Anna?" He froze, the beer halfway to his lips. For a split second, I thought he was going to lie, to make up some excuse. But then his shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, defeated sigh. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter," I snapped. "What matters is that you're cheating on Sarah, and you've been lying to everyone. How could you do this?" He didn't say anything at first, just sat down heavily on the couch, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I felt a wave of anger rise up inside me. "That's not good enough, Jason. You've got a family. Sarah, the kids, what about them? How could you throw it all away?" "I don't know," he muttered. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my brother, the guy who had always seemed so solid, so dependable. And now he was sitting here, admitting to an affair like it was some mistake he couldn't control. "Jason, you have to end it. You have to tell Sarah the truth." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. "I can't. She'll leave me. She'll take the kids, and I'll lose everything." "You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around," I shot back. "You can't keep living like this. It's not fair to Sarah, and it's not fair to the kids. You need to tell her." Part 4, The Confession and the Fallout. After that conversation, Jason didn't speak to me for a while. I think he was hoping I'd just forget about it, that I'd let it go. But I couldn't. Every time I saw Sarah, every time I saw their kids, I felt like I was betraying them by keeping Jason's secret. I gave him an ultimatum: either he tells Sarah, or I will. He didn't take it well. We argued, screamed at each other, and nearly came to blows. But I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let him destroy his family without facing the consequences. A week later, Jason sat Sarah down and told her the truth. I wasn't there for the conversation, but I heard about it afterward. Sarah was devastated, of course. She couldn't believe that the man she had built her life with, the father of her children, had betrayed her so deeply. They tried to work things out at first, going to therapy, trying to salvage what was left of their marriage. But the trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. Sarah filed for divorce 3 months later. Part 5, Picking Up the Pieces. In the aftermath of the divorce, our family was never the same. Jason moved out, into a small apartment on the other side of town. He and Sarah shared custody of the kids, but their relationship was cold, distant. There were no more family barbecues, no more holiday gatherings where everyone was under one roof. The fracture was deep, and it affected all of us. As for me, I struggled with my own feelings of guilt. Had I done the right thing by forcing Jason to confess? Could things have been different if I had stayed out of it? I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that secrets like the one Jason was keeping don't stay buried forever. They have a way of rising to the surface, no matter how hard you try to hide them. Years have passed since then, and life has moved on. Jason eventually moved out of state, trying to start fresh in a new city. I hear from him occasionally, but our relationship has never fully recovered. There's a part of me that still resents him for what he did, for putting me in a position where I had to choose between loyalty to him and doing what was right. Sarah is doing better now. She's found peace in her new life, and we still talk from time to time. She's even started dating again, though she's cautious, understandably so. Trust doesn't come easily after you've been hurt like that. And as for me? I've learned that sometimes, doing the right thing means hurting the people you love. It's a painful truth, but one that's necessary if you want to live with a clear conscience. I only hope that Jason has learned that lesson too.